topics and opinions expressed on the following show are solely those of the hosts and their guests and not those of W4WN Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4WN Radio, its employees, or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4WN Radio.
This is Beyond Confidence with your host, Divya Parekh. Do you want to live a more fulfilling life? Do you want to live your legacy and achieve your personal, professional, and financial goals? Well, coming up on Divya Parekh's Beyond Confidence, you will hear real stories of leaders, entrepreneurs, and achievers who have stepped into discomfort, shattered their status quo, and are living the life they want. You will learn how relationships are the key to achieving your aspirations and financial goals. Moving your career or business forward does not have to happen at the expense of your personal or family life, or vice versa. Learn more at www.divyaparekh.com, and you can connect with Divya at contact@divyaparekh.com. This is Beyond Confidence, and now here's your host, Divya Parekh.
Good morning, listeners. And of course, as you all know, Tuesday is my favorite morning of the week because I get to be here with you. So, talking about kindness, I want to talk about our guest, Ellen. She was experiencing storm and she was very kind enough to reach out and kind of apprise me of the situation. And here's what I want to share, that so many times what happens is that people can be so caught up with what's happening to them, and it's hard to remember other people in the moment. But she took that time to reach out, and that's our kindness story for the day. And it helps prepare the other person. So even when you may be in the thick of something, thinking about others can go a long way. And I want to thank each and every one of you who have got our books, especially The Entrepreneur's Garden and Expert to Influencer, amongst many of other books, because those two books will change your lives. And not only that, part of the proceeds goes to kiva.org. So it's a win-win situation all around. So let's welcome our guest. Welcome, Ellen.
Hi, good morning. Thank you for having me.
Good morning. It's a joy to have you here. So Ellen, share with us, do you remember a moment or a person that left a positive mark on you when you were a child?
When I was a child, boy, there are so many. Let's see. When I was a child, I think there's a teacher that really stands out to me. She was a world history teacher that I had in the 7th grade. And she was really, really hard on me. And I didn't like that, right? I didn't like it. I didn't like being corrected or brought back into alignment with where I needed to be because I was a kid. No kids enjoy that. But she did it in a way that always felt like she expected better of me because she knew I could do more and be better. And I remember this one day, I actually got kicked out of the classroom. I don't remember why, but I was standing in the hallway just fuming. I was so upset. There was a passionate argument going on in the classroom from what I remember. And she stepped out in the hall and she really got in my face. And she said, you know what? Someday you're going to grow up and all that heart and all that emotion is going to help you. Ooh, I'm getting emotional thinking about this. She was right. It's at the center. It's at the center of why I do what I do. So she was right. Wow. Sorry about that.
No, there's no sorry needed. This is a safe space. And our listeners are also wonderful because here's the thing, that when you're vulnerable, it takes courage to be vulnerable. And
yes.
It's all right. So many times it again comes back to the little actions that we talk about. And as I talked about your action today in the morning, because it's a live show, we make sure whatever it's ready. So just kind of giving me a heads up got me ready. And now, yes, your teacher was in your face, and look at the impact she left on you.
Yeah.
So we don't realize it, but it's so important that our words and our actions and behaviors, and even a smile as you're walking down the street, can impact somebody for life. So it's important to take that responsibility.
Yeah.
So as you grew
Absolutely.
up, did you have any interests or any specific hobbies or areas that just had you by like, yes, I gotta keep on pursuing this?
For a long time, I was a musician. I
Mm,
started playing the flute when I was 7, at the end of 2nd grade. I grew up in Detroit, and in the elementary school, at the end of 2nd grade, the band teacher in the elementary school came around to all the classrooms showing people the different instruments, and I was absolutely captivated by the flute for some reason. And so I was so excited about it that the band teacher sent one home with me for the summer to see if I,
mm.
do anything with it over the summer. And I remember trying and trying and trying to get sound out of it, and finally managed to get some sound out of it, practically hyperventilating in the process. And I was so excited and so proud of myself for that. And I went on to play for many, many years, performing and studying it in college as a minor, and just really continuing to play into adulthood. It's really only about 15, 16 years ago that I sort of moved on from that, and I find music in my life in different ways, but I still have my flute, and I still can play it when the urge strikes to do that. So it's music has always been a really important and big part of my life.
That's beautiful because you stuck with it. And as you said that, you're finding music in different ways. I'm just a listener. I've tried my hand at a couple of things and not been good at it. So
It's
I
okay,
do
we need the
appreciate
listeners too.
people who have musical intelligence. So you mentioned that you even had it as a minor. So what would you say? Music is such a universal language.
Yeah.
It is so beautiful. It doesn't matter. And sometimes I hear songs from another culture, another country, and if it has got a good beat to it, even if you don't understand the lyrics or words, your body and soul just dances to it. So
Yeah.
as you played through it, and what would you say that music has in commonality that can bring human beings together?
Well, I think that, it's exactly what you said. The visceral experience that we have in our bodies of listening to something, and the way that the melody or the beat enters into our subconscious. I think it just really, has the power to move us. I had the opportunity and the privilege to go on tour with a symphony when I was, in high school, and we toured around different countries in Europe. And in some of the countries that we visited, the host families we stayed with all spoke some level of English, but a lot of people that we encountered did not speak English. And yet they showed up at these concerts that we would give as a bunch of high school students from the US. And they didn't necessarily understand the words that our conductor was saying. There was always a translator on hand. But boy, were they moved by the music that we were producing together on stage. So that was an experience that I had that really showed me that firsthand, of the way that it cuts across culture, it cuts across language. There really is something quite universal about the way in which music just touches people's souls.
Hmm. And that's beautiful. So, what was the other major in your college, and where did your life take you in terms of career?
On a very winding road, Divya. So I
Who
have
says life is a straight road? So many people
Right.
think life is a straight road. Okay, elementary school, middle school, high school, and then job. But here's the beauty of life that, if you're open to it and look at life as an adventure, every day brings something new. And sometimes yesterday I was talking to one of my clients and I just said, let life come to you at times.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I also look at it as, I mean, every step that I've taken has brought me to where I am today, so I certainly wouldn't go
Mm-hmm.
back and change any of it. I had a double major in college in biology and French. I think
Mm.
I thought I wanted to be Jacques Cousteau. Um, I really liked marine biology. I really liked science. After college, I worked in a clinical lab looking at people's chromosomes through a microscope 10 hours a day. That was not for me. Then I had an opportunity to go to Central America and work in field biology. So
Mm.
I took advantage of that and went down and spent a year working in a very rural part of Nicaragua in Central America. And I was in charge of a reforestation project in 12 little tiny villages
Oh,
in a
wow.
very, very remote part of the country. And
Mm-hmm.
so I learned to speak Spanish, baptism by fire, 100%. I spoke French already, so there's a lot of relationship between those two languages, so it was easier to pick it up. And being a musician helped. I have a good ear, so I was able to pick Spanish up and live and work there for a year. But I went through a lot that year. There were lots of unpleasant experiences.
Mm.
I have a
Sorry
mouth
to hear
on
that.
me. I was a female, a young
Mm.
female, in a very machista kind of culture, and
Mm.
was not always well received, and sort of got myself into some difficult situations because of it. So at the end of the year, what I realized as my biggest takeaway was it had nothing to do with science. What kept me there through all
Mm.
of this challenges and struggles during that year, it was the people, it was the relationships that I
Mm.
built, some of which literally saved my life. It was just the power of those connections and the way in which they looked to me and I looked to them. And both sides felt like our lives had been dramatically changed and enriched for each
Mm.
other. And so I thought, I've got to figure out what to call the kind of work I was doing here, because it wasn't about reforestation. It was about community and it was about community building. I've got to figure out what to
Mm.
call that when I go back home to the States so I can do that kind of work. And so I came back to the United States, and this was back in 1998. I came back to the US and found my way into community organizing. And I did that for a number of years. And that was very much wrapped up in people and
Mm.
relationships and understanding what's important to people in communities and how those people can come together and be a united, strong voice to have an influence and an impact on how
Mm.
decisions are being made in their communities. And that was amazing work. But the part of it I loved above everything else was just the transformation that would take place with someone standing up for the first time and learning how to tell their story in a powerful
Right.
and compelling way. And I loved that. So when I left community organizing in 2005, sort of accidentally started this company that I still have today, because the people that knew me from that national network started calling me and asking me to come back and help with leadership training and help with board development and things like that. So that's how my company began 19 years ago.
That's beautiful. So let's take a look at the time you said that you were in a country where the culture was different, and yet it was the relationships
Mm.
that saved your life and you went through a lot. So if you were to reflect back upon that journey, what would you say were your top 2 to 3 lessons that you still carry with you?
I mean, above all, I would say, never underestimate the power of one relationship.
Hmm.
Um, the people I was working with were, um, what they call peasant farmers. Most of them had no education. They had no reading and writing ability, and yet they were incredibly wise, incredibly smart, and they really carried me through that year. So the power of relationships above all, I would say, is the number one lesson. Um, Second, I would say to remember that we aren't in this alone, right? And it stems from the power of the relationships, but the power of community beyond the individual relationships, the power of that community to lift you up when you're struggling, to carry you, to help you, to walk through life with you and be there as an accompaniment that enriches life, that makes it better, that, have people to celebrate with, have people to cry with. The power of community is incredibly strong. So that would be my second takeaway. And then I think the third takeaway is that it's really important that we speak our truth, even when your voice shakes or even when it feels really scary. The importance of speaking your truth and living in an aligned way with that truth, making sure that your walk matches your talk, is really
Hmm.
central as a lesson that I pulled from that experience and another one that really guides how I live my life and do my business today.
Hmm. Yeah, no, those are very powerful. So coming to, let's say we are going to like look at people's assumptions and people's behaviors from top down. Usually from most fields, different sectors, different industries, people expect that leadership begins top down. So when you talk about the boards, and you nowadays, there's so many other titles as well. Like they've got chief creative officer and chief research officer. They've come up with wonderful titles, and so let's assume that there is this make of the board. So what would you say that what's happening now is like these are people with a lot of different expertise, experience, they're bringing in value, they've got different skill sets, and so many times egos are also involved. And because egos are involved, if let's say somebody has made one decision, they stick to it and the whole team can fall apart. So let's say if a new board were being formed, what would you say is a good process to bring that board together, and what are the skill sets needed?
Hmm, that's a huge question. Let's see. I mean, first of all, I'm not somebody who believes that there's a one size fits all solution for pretty much anything. So I sort of struggle with having a, blanket solution that would match every situation. So saying that as a disclaimer up front, I would say that any new group of people that are coming together, their first order of business needs to be to learn about each other. So finding ways to learn each other's styles of communication and decision making, learning learning about one another as whole people, as human beings that have multidimensional lives, that have lots of experiences that matter. So, you know, looking at ways to accelerate a process that organically would take years to accomplish. There are great tools you can use to help accelerate that process. There's a million assessments in the marketplace. There's one in particular that I use that's very simple, that allows people to understand each other's hardwired nature very quickly, from communication style to how we accept ideas, how we come to trust, etc. That can be enormously helpful in letting people know each other from that perspective more quickly. And then also engaging in some intentional relationship building and trust fostering, I would say. You can't really build trust directly in my experience, but you can foster the conditions where it has the opportunity to grow and develop. And there's work you can do with a group of people to just help them understand that trust is most often a choice, that we extend it by choice, and having a framework that they're all in alignment around about how they're going to operate together, how they're going to handle difficult conversations that come up. Um, Aside from the logistics of, board governance and the specific kinds of rules from that perspective, I think the human interaction ground rules are just as important for any new group of people coming together, because that provides the roadmap for how that group can approach one another, how they can interact most successfully together. So that's probably the place I would get started. And then based on the individuals that are part of that collective, though their temperament, their collective energy would really guide from there how to build on all of that. You're muted, Divya. You're muted.
You're absolutely right, Ellen, that there's no one size that fits all.
Mhm.
Because let's say if it is a startup, then you need people who are ready to take fast and quick decisions, versus if somebody is coming to replace a couple of people in an established Fortune 50 company, or if it's a nonprofit organization. And again, it depends where it is at in the global framework. So very relevant points. You mentioned that you can accelerate it. So what is the tool that you use?
The tool that I use is called the Acumax Index.
Mhm.
Not a super well-known tool, although it should be because it's great. It's another Michigan-based company, and I met the creators of it about 10 years ago at a conference local to the Detroit area where I was at the time. And there really are just hundreds and hundreds of assessments out there, and they all have
Mhm.
value. They all have different aspects that are good. But the thing I love about the Acumax Index is two things. First of all, it consists of two questions, and it takes literally 5 to 10 minutes to complete. So its ease of use is just unbeatable. And then, secondly, from those two questions, it is astonishingly accurate and insightful in terms of what it can tell you. I have a group going through the introductory process with it right now. I did one of their debrief sessions earlier this morning, and um, just over and over again, the woman that I was talking to, I've never met her, but I have her Acumax, and I'm looking at it and I'm saying, these are probably some of your tendencies when it comes to communication and how you like to show up in a room and what you think about process and structure. And she just sat there shaking her head and said, finally, I don't understand how I just checked off some words. How are you getting all of this from that? So, of course, that's a
Yeah,
fun part of it for me, is
right,
that
right.
that reaction, but it's astonishingly accurate. So that's the main tool that I use.
Well, thank you for sharing. And you're absolutely right about the assessments. I have some of my own favorite assessment tools. And when they pull that information out, it's just fascinating how human beings and a little bit of their inner thought process can be unraveled.
Yeah.
So now you have mentioned about the assumptions. So let's say there's so many teams, that different types of teams. One is one team that's working towards the same goal. And they could be working towards the same goal, but they are coming from different departments. So let's talk about a team that is just, let's say it's an engineering production department, or it could be manufacturing, doesn't matter. So for a team to be successful, you already mentioned about the board, like, understanding each other, and a lot of principles apply over there too. Now, the role changes, and based on the roles, it does impact the behaviors and beliefs of individuals. So, do you address it differently, or do you think there's commonality across the board?
In terms of it being different than how I would manage the board.
Hmm.
So I mean, oftentimes my go-to starting place with any group of people that want to understand one another better and lay the groundwork for for maybe establishing common goals, working toward common goals. I often go to the Acumax Index as a first step so that I understand them better, but also so that I can help shed some insight for them about one another and about the team dynamics that are likely to grow out of their profiles from that tool. That's often a starting place for me. But then moving from that, I think that assumptions really are, I mean, I wrote a whole book about assumptions. Assumptions really are at the heart of every way in which any kind of communication breaks down. I have yet to find an example of communication breaking down where an assumption was not at the root cause of why it happened. So I think we just have so much opportunity to lean in and engage and ask more questions rather than stepping away, leaning back and just relying on our own assumptions about one another, whether it's about expectations, whether it's about, are we on the same page with a common goal? Are we actually all bought into the common goals that have been laid out? Or are people quietly disagreeing and therefore not necessarily engaging 100%? I think there's a lot of work that can be done up front to make sure, as one of my colleagues put it with a boat analogy, make sure that we're all on the same beach, that we all are walking toward the same boat, and that we all actually get into the same boat and then take our stations up within that boat so we can successfully navigate it where it needs to go. There are 3 or 4 layers of assumption that can interfere with us even successfully getting to the point where we can steer toward a common goal. There's so much that we've got to do to make sure we've established successfully and bought into that common goal first.
Absolutely. And you are absolutely right in that, like, having that buy-in in the common goal. Now, and as you mentioned that, assumption is at the root of the miscommunication or misunderstanding. So in your experience, what are some of the common misinterpretations or assumptions that you have seen that people live with and that becomes the roadblock to effective communication?
That's a great question. I'm not sure that I don't know that I've noticed one assumption that comes up repeatedly, but what I would say is we we seem to have learned a lesson somewhere between high school and college, I think is where it most often happens. Where in high school, if you're asking lots of questions, people might, sort of give you side eye and say, well, you're just a smarty pants, right? It's the nerds, the
Mhm.
smart ones that are always
Yeah.
asking all the questions.
Mhm.
Somehow in college, that got translated, at least in my experience, where the people asking the questions were the ones who couldn't keep up. And
Mm,
there seemed to be this stigma attached to asking too many
mm,
questions as like, you're just not getting it quickly enough. And I notice that in workplaces. I notice that among teams where people think, well, I can't ask that. If I ask that, they're going to think I don't know what I'm doing. Or they're going to think I'm not learning quickly enough or that I don't know how to do my job. And so I think that that's the tendency that I notice more than anything else is a real reticence to asking questions to make sure that you've got the fullest understanding possible. I think sometimes people get the gist, they get the edges of what they think they're supposed to do, but rather than just confirming that, asking one more question just to make sure they've understood correctly and can walk away more confident that they're taking the right next step, they're afraid to ask that clarifying question or two. And so they simply just, I'm going to go get started. And if I have to course correct, then I have to course correct. And man, there's so much wasted time, so much wasted energy in manufacturing, wasted money because production starts producing parts, for example. I live in an area heavy with automotive manufacturing. They start making parts the wrong way, or they don't change out the right piece of equipment, and it can be tens of thousands of dollars of wasted material because someone was afraid to ask those clarifying questions for fear of the stigma attached to it. So I think that's the trend I would highlight as the most common one.
Yeah, that's definitely very, very true. As you talked about, there can be stigma associated around that. So now that brings us the question. So, okay, people have assumptions. How can they get beyond that?
Well, honestly, I think it is to lean into that exact behavior that we just talked about and be willing to ask more questions. I think that when we're able to craft questions for the purpose of clarifying our understanding, to make sure that we're on the right track, make sure we've got the next right step planned and ready to move forward, to ask questions. And I think some easy language to help maybe make it clear that we do know what we're doing is to soften that question by simply saying, I appreciate this information. I want to just make sure that I am crystal clear about the right direction to go in. Is it all right if I just ask a couple of questions to make sure that I've understood exactly what you want, exactly how to get started, etc. And just being willing to lean in and actually ask those questions more than anything else is the simplest solution. It doesn't have to be complicated. Just being willing to lean in and ask the question that's in your mind, but that you might be afraid to ask. Ask anyway, and you won't go wrong.
Absolutely. And another way, if we were to flip the coin, is also whoever is leading the meeting, making sure that it's inclusive. And there are times there are going to be, as you mentioned about, that you use Acumax. Some people use DISC or Strength Finders and Colby Index. I mean, there are tons and tons of those.
Right.
So it's also important to recognize who may be the introverts in your group, in your team, and as we are talking about, coming back to the team, regardless wherever your team is. And if they don't want to speak up, what I've found is also that if you send ahead of time that, would love to, these are the decisions we are going to be working on. Do you have any thoughts about it? So,
yeah, 100%. I am absolutely on board with that strategy.
and it comes back to the first thing that you had mentioned when we were talking about the board is understanding people.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you have shared some very powerful nuggets over here. So let's say a team is running cohesively and now somebody leaves, which is always going to happen. There's going to be turnover. People get wonderful opportunities. They are going to another company or even moving to another department in the company. Now a new person comes in. What can the rest of the team, as well as the person who's the newbie, can do so that that boat doesn't rock? As you mentioned, that climb into that same boat.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great question. This is a challenge that every team I've ever worked with faces, right? Because people come and go, reorganization happens. I think that there is a responsibility that too often is not accepted, I think, on the part of the people who are already on the team, maybe the leader of that team, to really introduce the new member or members to the culture of the team. To say, these are some ground rules that we've established of how we want to operate together, and really just introducing that new member of the team to those ground rules and getting their input and buy-in to make sure that those ground rules are things that the new member of the team is willing to embrace and is willing to uphold. So I think some almost like mini orientation to the team and the expectations of how people are going to engage and interact with each other is really, really important. And then I think it's also important to play a little bit of catch up. So if they are using any assessment, DISC, Strength Finders, Acumax, whatever it is, if that team, often teams have an assessment or a tool that they've used to help them get to know each other better, to understand each other better. I think it can be a great opportunity to have the new person take that assessment and then show them where they fit in the team in terms of other people who may have similar styles, other people who may have different styles, and give them the same level of understanding that the existing team members already have about one another as another way to kind of bring them up to speed. And then I think the final part is just asking what their preferences are. How do you like to be communicated with? Are you someone that really has Teams open on your desk all day and you're great with getting random team messages all day or Slack? Or are you somebody that would prefer that I walk over past your desk or your office? Do you like an email to come? Like, what are your preferences? How do you like to receive communication about things? And then make the preferences of the team known to that person. So it's really just about communicating more openly and with more intention than I think a lot of us feel like we've got time to do, because we're moving so fast and the teams are so busy and everyone's got responsibilities, and it just feels like, well, they'll just catch up. They'll, come along with us and catch up. And it often puts that person at a huge disadvantage and just ends up taking so much longer for them to really integrate into the team and provide as much value as they're capable of, when we don't set aside a little bit of time to give them that advantage of coming in with some information and better understanding.
Mm-hmm. So you talked about like, oh, they will catch up. So that's an assumption somebody's making.
Yeah.
And you talk about, 2 or 3 strategies that can help people overcome assumptions. I mean, of course, you have shared quite a bit already, but do you have any go-to that you always fall back on and share with your clients?
Well, within the strategy of asking more questions, I think there are 100 different directions you can go with that, right? You mentioned before, the leaders of the team, it can be super beneficial to, for example, put out an agenda ahead of time to be able to say, here's what we're going to be talking about. Here's some decisions that need to be made. Come ready with opinions or ready to brainstorm ideas about these things or make a decision. I mean, I think that the responsibility lands on both parties, all parties involved, right? The responsibility of the new person to lean in and say, is it okay if I just ask some questions? Help me understand how you operate. Help me understand your structure. What are some things that you think are important for me to know or understand? Just all of the things, questions about all of the things. And then the team has the responsibility as well to lean in and ask questions of that new person about how they prefer to be contacted, or, what if it's a hybrid working situation, what days do they like to work from home? What days will they be available in the office? Do they prefer Zoom meetings from home, or do they prefer to wait and do their meetings when they're in the office in person? Just, again, leaning in and asking more questions and getting more specific to keep uncovering the layers that are really at the heart of all the nuance that's involved in how we communicate with one another. I don't think you can go wrong asking more and more questions.
Absolutely. So those are very powerful takeaways for our audiences, leaning into it. And yes, it's a zone of discomfort. Asking the question, because that's going to save the heartache and the battle of the egos later down the road. So if our listeners wanted to reach out to you, where could they connect with you? Share with us about your books.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks. Happy to. So my main website is scrolling along the bottom of our screen here, patnaudecoaching.com. On that website, you can find at the top of every page, at the bottom of every page, there's a link that says, let's talk or let's chat. And it'll take you to a form to just fill out some answers to a few questions of what you might be interested in talking about. And then I review those forms and set up compatibility calls. I am not everyone's cup of tea. I don't pretend to be, or shot of whiskey, as I like to say. And so having a compatibility call, not only for me to learn about what someone might be facing or struggling with, why they're reaching out for support, but also for us to evaluate one another and decide if there might be a good fit. And if there isn't, I'm always happy to refer out. I have lots of partners, lots of colleagues. I'm always happy to refer to someone that I think would be a better fit if it's not me. You can also find me on different social media channels. I am on LinkedIn at Ellen Patnaude. It's just my name, at Ellen Patnaude. And then on the other platforms, except for Twitter, I'm not on Twitter. But for Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, you can find me at Patnaude Coaching, those places. On the website, there is a spot certainly where you could order signed copies of each of my books, or you also can find me on Amazon. You can find me on whatever your preferred bookseller is. So this is the first one I released. It's called I Thought You Knew, Confessions of a Chronic Assumer. That one is all about assumptions and the ways in which they interfere with our everyday interactions. And then this piece is one I wrote and released in May of this year, called You're Not Doing It Right, Loving My Mother Through an Unpredictable Caregiving Journey. Talk about assumptions. I learned a whole new dimension of assumptions when it came to being a reluctant caregiver, and all the assumptions that are made about caregivers and about caregiving, all the assumptions we make about ourselves and what we ought to be doing or ought to be capable of or whatever, in that shame narrative that just can really overtake you as a caregiver. So I wrote a book about our experience because it was a really difficult experience. And I've met so many other caregivers who have said the same thing, and we just don't talk about it enough. We don't talk about how hard it is and all the complicated emotions that we feel. And instead we act like we're not supposed to feel that way. We're supposed to be martyrs. And that's just simply not true.
Yeah. It's having gone through with my parents, I get it. And there's a lot of things where we don't talk about how we are feeling, and that's a whole conversation for another day. But one of the things that I'd say is that if your cup is empty, you can pour from it.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So thank you for sharing your journey, and sounds like you had a very intense journey and a lot of emotions and everything involved. So
it was it was a difficult journey, but the thing I take from it, this all I'll say about it is I thought I was the only one who was struggling when I was caregiving and trying to still raise my kids and trying to run a business. I thought I was the only one, and that there was something wrong with me, because that's what my mother used to say to me all the time. You're not doing it right, because we had a difficult relationship. So I swallowed that hook, line, and sinker and believed it was just me, that I was inadequate, that there was something wrong with me, that I couldn't just figure it out. And what I realized coming out of it on the other side is that's simply not true. Most people, I've yet to meet a caregiver who has said there was no struggle, and that was part of it.
I haven't met anyone either. So
I wrote this book as a gift to other caregivers, past, present, and future, to just let yourself off the hook, be a little nicer to yourself, and know that you're not alone, and whatever you're feeling is okay to feel. And if we just start there with letting go of that assumption that we're supposed to feel and be a certain way to be successful at caregiving or anything else, it's just not true. We got to let go of that. It opens up so many more possibilities.
Absolutely. And thank you for sharing that, because self-compassion is as necessary as being compassionate towards others. So thank you for joining us, Ellen, and listeners today. wonderful, beautiful people, what we want to leave you with today is self-compassion. And you'll be surprised how that self-compassion will extend into compassion for others as well. So reach out to us, let us know how we can support you so that you can live the life you want and deserve. And thank you, Juan, for making the show technically possible. See you again next week. Take care and be well.
Thank you for being part of Beyond Confidence with your host, Divya Parekh. We hope you have learned more about how to start living the life you want. Each week on Beyond Confidence, you hear stories of real people who have experienced growth by overcoming their fears and building meaningful relationships. During Beyond Confidence, Divya Parekh shares what happened to her when she stepped out of her comfort zone to work directly with people across the globe. She not only coaches people how to form heart connections, but also transform relationships to mutually beneficial partnerships as they strive to live the life they want. If you are ready to live the life you want and leverage your strengths, learn more at www.divyaparekh.com. And you can connect with Divya at contact@divyaparekh.com. We look forward to you joining us next week.